Alright, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to be taking a look at the Doctor Who Commander decks and briefly going over the deck's core strategies. While we don't have time to go over all 100 cards in each deck, there will be a link in the description to the complete deck lists. So let's start with Timey-Wimey, a Jeskai deck with the 10th Doctor as the commander and Rose Tyler as the companion. When you attack, the Doctor will reveal cards from the top of your library until you hit a non-land. You can then exile it with 3 time counters on it and it gains suspend. So basically it'll cast itself for free 3 turns later, after those time counters are removed. He can also time travel, so what that means is each time you time travel you can add or remove time counters from things, and then Rose gets +1/+1 for each time counter she has, and she will get time counters when she attacks for each card you own with the time counters on it. And remember, the 10th Doctor can just add time counters to Rose. They're basically +1/+1 counters. And yeah, you kind of see what's going on. This is a Jeskai suspend deck with this new time travel mechanic to mess around with all these time counters. So we get big things like dinosaurs on a spaceship, Jadoon enforcers, and Star Whale. These are all big giant things. The dinosaurs will make a bunch of tokens and then pump them when it enters. The enforcer will limit the number of creatures that can attack you. And the whale is massive and protects your creatures with ward. So these are giant. The problem is they're either very expensive to cast, or if you suspend them, they have a lot of time counters. They're going to take a while to get into play unless we time travel. So we have things like Time Beetle, Rotating Fireplace, and All of History all at once. The first will time travel every time it hits a player, which is going to remove time counters from all your stuff. The Fireplace can time travel, and it taps for mana equal to the number of time counters on it. So it just adds more and more mana the more you time travel. And the spell time travels with Storm, which can be pretty crazy. We also get things with Vanishing, like Kraken Time, Regenerations Restored, and Idris. Now normally cards with Vanishing are very powerful because they are slowly dying, right? You get this big powerful thing, but it's only going to last a few turns. But with this deck, you can constantly supply them with extra time counters so they don't get sacrificed. And there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. Lots of super flavorful cards if you're familiar with the show. Some powerful cards that play around with time counters, and also just lots of things that care about casting things from exile, because that's what suspend does. But generally, if you like the idea of suspending big spells and then speeding up the time it takes to cast them, Timey-Wimey might be the deck for you. Next up is Masters of Evil with Davros Dalek Creator at the helm. He's a 4-mana 3/4 with Menace that will make a 3/3 with Menace during your end step if an opponent lost 3 life that turn. Then each opponent that lost 3 life has to choose whether you draw a card or they discard a card. So this deck is filled with villains from the show with a focus on being the aggro player at the table. You see the commander being reinforced with things like Clockwork Droid, Cyberman Patrol, and Vashta Nerada. The droid can be exerted when you attack with it to make it unblockable so you can deal 3 damage, which is what your commander cares about. Cyberman Patrol gives artifact creatures afflict 3, which makes it easier to deal 3 damage. And Vashta Nerada is indestructible and has shadow, so it's hard to kill and basically impossible to block. And it'll get +1/+1 counters each turn if a creature died, so it gets up to 3 power to help trigger your commander. Another major theme of this deck is artifact creatures. Since your commander makes artifact creature tokens, you can see that being boosted with things like the Cyber Controller, Cult of Skaro, and the Master Gilfrey's End. The first creates an army of Cybermen when it enters, and then pumps artifact creatures, not only its own Cybermen, but the artifact creatures made by your commander. The second can do all kinds of stuff, including pumping artifact creatures or creating them. The Master will force your opponents with the highest life total to make a choice whenever one of your non-token artifacts die. They can either lose 4 life or let you make a token copy of the thing that just died. And this concept of making your opponents make bad choices is prevalent in the deck. There's things like Sycorax Commander, Missy, the Dalek Emperor, all force your opponents to make choices that really only benefit you. You're constantly forcing your opponents to make a choice and you're the one that usually benefits from those choices being made. And there's also goad cards too, by the way. It has a goad sub-theme throughout the deck. So basically, you're messing with your opponents, you're making them make bad choices, you're making them attack each other, and you're generally just being the disruptive, villainous menace at the table. That sounds like your cup of tea. Masters of Evil might be the deck for you. Next on the list is Blast from the Past, with the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith as the commander and companion. Both care about casting historic spells. The Doctor lets you cast historic things off the top of your library, and Sarah will investigate whenever you do. But what is unique about this deck is it is filled with doctors and companions. There are 8 total doctors and a companion for each. But all the companions, if you look at the ability, can be paired with any doctor. So you can actually mix and match any doctor and companion you want. Now, this might seem like the deck doesn't really have a theme. You have all these companions, you have all these commanders, but what's the point? But remember that they're all legendary. Legendary permanents are historic, and historic is the theme of the deck. So you can see this with things like Jamie McCrimmon, Joe Grant, and Tegan Javanka. The first gets pumped when you play historic spells. Joe Grant lets you cycle historic spells, and Tegan will give your legends indestructible. And this continues throughout the deck with things like Alistair, Perry Brown, Displaced Dinosaurs, all of which have abilities relating to historic spells. And remember that artifacts are historic, so Displaced Dinosaurs will turn all your mana rocks into 7/7s. And yes, artifacts are historic, so you get lots of artifacts that synergize with your legends, like Bessie, Hero's Blade, and Hero's Podium. Bessie makes legends unblockable, the blade auto-attaches to legends when you cast them, and the podium will give your legends +1/+1 for each other legend you control. And because the deck is filled with doctors and companions, they all just pump each other and make each other massive. So basically, this deck is a giant smorgasbord of flavorful characters from Doctor Who, tied together by their legendary and historic status, so they all kind of work together. If that sounds cool, check out Blast from the Past. The final deck is Paradox Power, a teamer deck with the 13th Doctor as the commander and Yasmin Khan as the companion. The Doctor will put a +1/+1 counter on a creature whenever you cast a spell from somewhere other than your hand, and will also untap all your creatures with counters on them at end of turn. Yasmin exiles the top card of your library and it lets you cast it until end of turn, which enables the Doctor since she triggers when you cast those spells. So this is another deck that cares about casting things from exile, like the Timey-Wimey deck, although in this case we're not trying to suspend stuff necessarily, we just care about any cast from exile, so that includes things like Foretold Soldier, Carvanista, and Lunar Hatchling. The Soldier has Foretell, so for the same price as its mana cost, you can just kind of freely cast it from exile. Carvanista has an Adventure, so you can cast the Adventure, it goes into exile, and then when you cast that, you're going to be casting it from exile to trigger your commander. And the Hatchling has Escape, meaning you can cast it from your graveyard, which is going to put a +1/+1 counter on something with your commander. It also has land cycling to get it there in the first place. And there's also a ton of things that care about casting things from exile and whatnot, like Memory Worm, Sisterhood of Karn, and Flaming Tyrannosaurus. The first deals damage, lets the opponent loot, and gets a counter. The Sisterhood doubles its own counters, and the dinosaur is going to get a counter and deal 3 damage whenever we do our thing with casting stuff from wherever we're casting it from that's not our hand. And you may be noticing that there's another theme with this deck, because the 13th Doctor doesn't just care about casting things from not our hand, she also distributes counters and untaps creatures with counters on them, so we get things like Danny Pink, Araxa, and the 12th Doctor. The first will draw cards whenever we put counters on things. Araxa makes tokens when we cast stuff from exile, so we have this endless supply of creatures to put counters on. And the Doctor will let you and your opponent copy spells you cast from exile, and then distributes counters whenever you cast copies. So we also care a lot about just distributing +1/+1 counters. There are more exile shenanigans in the deck, lots of things that cast from places other than our hand, lots of things that benefit from casting from exile, and plenty of flavorful new cards if you like Doctor Who, but generally, if you like casting things from any place other than your hand and gaining an advantage for doing so, Paradox Power might be the deck for you. And that's it for the Doctor Who Commander decks. Check the description for links to the complete deck list. I'll also leave Amazon affiliate links, and as always, I strongly discourage you from using those if you have a local game store to support. Be sure to let me know which deck you're most interested in the comments below, and in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.